Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Michael Regina. I am the author and illustrator of the all-ages horror graphic novel, The Sleepover. And on my channel I talk about creative things and this sort of deal where I explain to you my own process and sort of try to help you be more of the creative person you were created to be. And I apologize if my voice sounds a little bit raspy. I'm still getting over what I can only assume was the flu. It was super bad. It took me out for like 2 weeks and my voice is still coming back. But I really wanted to talk about a book that I read during the time that I was sick. And this book was The Dip by Seth Godin. This book really seemed to hit me at a nice time while I was contemplating sort of like, what is my path forward in comics? Where am I at? What do I want to do? And I figured I would give you an overview of what the book is talking about, but also some observations I made on my own about sort of what the comic book journey is like, or the creative journey, and how we all go through these periods of time and what it takes to get through them. If you're not familiar with this concept, Seth Godin defines it as a temporary setback or period of difficulty that occurs after the initial excitement of starting something new. It's a challenging phase where your progress may seem slow, obstacles arise, and quitting becomes very tempting. However, Godin argues that pushing through the dip is what separates the best from the mediocre, and those who persist through it emerge as leaders in their field. And as I read through this book, I realized that these dips are actually really prevalent. And when I started thinking through my own journey, I identified sort of 3 primary dips that occur in every creative journey, and I could identify where I went through at least 2 of them, and I now find myself in the 3rd. So I thought it'd be cool to talk about what are these 3 dips that occur in the creative journey, how did I get through them, and where am I currently at, and how do I plan to push through it. And the weird thing was I realized that I went through all these without even like articulating it as this. It was just something I identified was like the challenge that I was currently in. And then if I hoped to continue in my creative journey, I had to learn how to break through it and find success. Well, the 3 dips that I've identified, at least for graphic novelists, and I'm sure it applies to like literally any creative field, are the first dip, which is the can I do this dip. And this dip is largely marred by just the ability to have competency and get through it. We'll dig into that in a minute. The second dip is the professional dip. And this professional dip is, am I good enough to be considered a professional? Like the quality of my work, is it high enough that I'm regarded as professional? And then the final one is the excellence dip, which is, can I become one of the best in the world? And you have to work through each one of these if you hope to achieve the next one. Or if you happen to jump right through some of them, you might actually lose some ground because you haven't honed all the skills that are necessary during that dip to be able to achieve the thing that comes later. In other words, like if you're exceptionally good at something, but you've not learned the lessons from the other 2 dips, you may find that you have to regress and go backwards. And you might have gained some advantages up here, but you've got to learn the lessons that each one of these dips provides for you. So let's talk about the first dip. The first dip is the can I do this dip. And this dip is all about competency, basic competency. Quality is a marker here, but really it's about quantity in the pushing through and learning the basics of the thing and getting good at it. So for me, when I was in this tip, it occurred right before the Adamsville process. When I talked about this in my journey, it was a realization that I was in a large pool of people who aspired to something, and very few were at least able to do the basics, which was completed. So for me, getting through this first tip was all about realizing that I was in a large pool of people who were aspiring towards something but had not taken the effort to actually push through it and show that they can do it. So what this looked like was there's a lot of people who say, hey, I want to be a comic book artist. I want to make books. And they muddle around with it and they tinker with it, but very few of them actually take the time to learn the discipline to finish it. And so that pushing through that dip, the breakthrough in that dip was, hey, I've got to sit down, I've got to do the work, I've got to finish books and show that I can finish it. And if I can do that, I'm instantly in the top 10% of all people aspiring to be a comic book artist. The great thing about this dip is that it is completely in your control, meaning that success in it and breaking through to the other side has everything to do with your own effort, your own time, your own discipline, and really little to nothing to do with other people. You don't necessarily need the approval of other people. You don't need them to affirm your abilities or to pay you. You just need to be able to go, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do the work, and I'm going to finish it. And that's kind of the process I took for the whole Adamsville series. My primary goal was, I need to show that I can do the thing that I'm aspiring to do. So I made that in my entire goal. Sure, I wanted it to be good. Sure, I wanted it to look great, read well, all those things, and I always tried, but the primary goal was, can I finish? Can I do this? That's the first dip. And if you can push through it, you're automatically through that dip, which on to the next one, which is the professional dip. The professional dip is all about is the quality. Now the effort moves over towards the quality of your work. If you've managed to do the work and get to the other side, you're now in the professional dip. And the professional dip is all about improving your skills. Now you've earned these prerequisites. You've done the work. You've completed it. You've learned how to get a book done. You've learned how to finish a painting. You've learned how to finish an illustration. And you're consistently doing that. And now it becomes all about, can I get good enough to be considered professional in this means? And this actually is a little bit more of a difficult dip to cross because it requires you to gain some level of approval from forces outside of your control. This is where you're actually actively going through the process of getting editorial feedback, earning jobs, pushing through rejection, all that sort of thing, and landing your first sort of professional gig. But the way that I went about achieving this was, once the Adamsville series was done, I knew that this was the phase that I was in. I looked at the body of work that Adamsville had finished, and I was like, man, this is like, I've done it. This exists. It's not bad. But I can see clearly the areas where I need to grow as an artist and as a writer in my presentation if I hope to land an agent, if I hope to get a book deal, if I hope to push forward into that next step of being a professional and considered a professional within the industry. So the way that I pushed through this was comparing my work to other work. I would literally take my art and I would put it on the table. The biggest opportunity I saw in my abilities in pushing through this was improving my art. So I would literally just take my artwork, my pages, and I would set them down next to other artwork and pages that I liked. And if my art clearly seemed to be at a deficit, clearly did not stand its own on the wall, then it needed to be, I need to rethink the process. In fact, on my wall over here, and I'll include a video of it, I have included some of my own paintings on a wall of original art that I've purchased, where I am able to put that up there. And if I look at my art there, I can say, man, my art belongs on this wall. It doesn't feel unprofessional. It feels like it belongs to be alongside these other artists that I really love and appreciate. And when I knew that I was at that phase, when I knew that I could put my art up against anybody else's, I knew that I had achieved kind of this, at least the parts that I can control. I had worked my way to a place where I had done everything I could to improve my own artwork. And once I had done that, I knew that I could go through this professional process and have a higher likelihood of success. So what does that look like from an art standpoint? From an art standpoint, I think it means comparing your art to other people. It means comparing your art to yourself and improving day by day, stacking your art alongside other art that you like and seeing whether or not it stacks up. One of the things I like to do when I develop my style, this is really the phase where I learned to develop my style, because I knew at the point before I was just trying to get things done. And now that I was in this active process of I need to improve my ability, I started going, what are the things that I like about certain pieces of art, and how do I achieve that on my own? So I would look at the line art of certain artists that I love, and I'd be like, man, I really love the line art that they have, this sort of grainy, textury feel, and I developed my own brush for that. Or I would say, I really love watercolor art, and I wish I could do my comics in watercolor, and then start developing as a watercolorist, such as artists like Ryan Andrews for the line art, or Tyler Crook for the watercolor, this sort of thing. Or I would look at it and go, I really love the dynamic, action-filled scenes that Daniel Warren Johnson makes in his art. And I know I make kids comics, so it's not going to look quite the same, but how do I bring elements of what I see in his art into my own to make my art feel more dynamic? Or I would look at the character art and the design of her characters Lorena Alvarez has in her book Nightlights and Hakote, and I would try to mimic that in my own and go, what elements of this can I bring into my art style that would push me towards things? And what's cool about creating your own art style is really, when people say I'm trying to create my own style, it's something that's unique. It's really an amalgamation of all the interesting things that you like, and you bring them all together, and it starts to form your own style. So it's like, I'm a little bit of Daniel Warren Johnson. I'm a little bit of Kazu Kibuishi. I'm a little bit of Ryan Andrews. I'm a little bit of Lorena Alvarez. I'm a little bit of a lot of different artists. This is the process I go through. I look at art and I go, I like this artist. I like what they do. I want to bring it into my stuff. And I just piecemeal all these different things until I achieve something that feels unique and then hopefully looks really, really good. For being a writer, it might mean that you have to submit to contests, you want to finish short stories, you want to just finish stories and get feedback. It's really about sort of achieving a certain level of feedback from other people that you feel like is, man, people really like my stuff. It's a little harder to gauge though, because you got to get people to read your stuff. So you got to look for places where people are reading. And often the editorial board at a agency or a publisher is the best way to know whether you've achieved certain levels of professional status, because while you don't need them, they are sort of gatekeepers of the industry. So gaining their sort of input and feedback is really essential. The good news is once you break through this step and you achieve sort of a level of professional status where you're either getting your book published or you gain some sort of large scale approval, either through Kickstarters or whatever the case might be, you've pushed through the professional dip. You are now in this level of like, I am good enough to actually be considered like a working professional in a industrial sense. Now, to be clear, anybody making money from their artwork is considered a professional. If you're making money from your art, you are a professional. But what I'm specifically talking about is achieving a certain level of industry-wide recognition that shows that you have achieved a certain level of mastery that puts you in a tier all its own. And really, that's honestly what I've been trying to do with my books, The Sleepover and Deepwater Creek. I have, through those books, I broke through, and so now I'm professional, and now I'm going like, I need my work to stand on the same level of all these other books that are out there, and for people to look at it and say like, this is really, really good. This person knows what they're doing. But once you've achieved that, where do you go from here? For a lot of people, this is sort of the end of the road. They're like, I've achieved it. I've gotten a book deal. I'm getting published. I've achieved this success. I'm all good. And while for the most part, that's a great place to be. There's this interesting thing that Seth talks about in his book where he says sort of like, we underestimate being the best in the world. He kind of shows these charts of like how the #1 best-selling book sells every other book underneath it by like 10 times. And the #1 song in the country outdoes every other song by like 10 times, or the #1 movie in the box office does everything by like 10 times or double, or whatever the case might be. And the point that he's making is that a lot of things sort of get out into the open, but to be #1 in a thing, to be considered the best in a thing, the rewards for being there are so much higher compared to every other thing. And so that's why I talked about this third dip called the excellence dip. And this excellence dip is all about trying to become the best at the thing that you do in the world. Now, that can be a really wide net. And so one of the things he talks about in this book that I thought was helpful is he's like, it's not that you're the best artist in the world. I mean, who could be the best artist in the world, right? That's far too vague, far too open-ended, and really difficult to say whether or not you actually are. But what you can say is, I want to be the best at a specialty, so the best at a certain thing. And so you think about like the best, the best animation studio for children's content, or the best children's fantasy author, or the best, whatever the thing is. The point being that you already have a highly specialized thing that you're into, that you're creating at, and the goal becomes become the best at that thing. So for me, when I stopped and I thought about this in the context of his book, I'm like, for me, the goal is be the best children's book horror graphic novelist. So I'm a children's book author, I make graphic novels, and I make specifically horror graphic novels. And that sphere is a much smaller sphere by comparison than saying I want to be the best graphic novelist. Because right now, Dave Pilkey has that on full lockdown, guys. I'm not even, guys going nuts. It's kind of crazy. But I can say that in this horror genre, I want to be the best at that thing. Now, the problem with this specific dip is it's almost entirely outside of your control. You cannot control what other people think of your art. You cannot control how much people love it and accept it. So this is where a lot of people ruin their lives, because they kind of are willing to do anything and everything to get this, and they kind of hurt friendships, they hurt their life, they hurt their work-life balance, they hurt their health. And that's, I think the finding a balance here is really difficult. So what can you do? Because again, I'm all about like, what are the things you can control? So while I was sick, I thought about this a lot because I was like, I don't feel like drawing, but I can sit around and think about this book that I thought was really interesting and speaking to kind of where I was. And what I realized was that all I can do here is become really focused about the thing that I'm trying to do. So when I was in the professional dip, I was like, I just want my art to be good enough. I want my art to stand alone against everybody else. I want to be considered as good as somebody else in the industry so that I can get a book deal and move on and so forth. But now I'm going like, well, I've achieved that. I'm in this sort of excellence dip. This is the phase that I'm in. And so what can I do? And so for me, it's about becoming very intentional about those three things. I make kids books, I make graphic novels, I make horror books. And so doing everything I can not to deviate from that and go, what are the things I can do to become really good at those three things? How can I really get better as a children's book illustrator that makes graphic novels and does horror books? What are the things that are out there in the world that I can use as influence or inspiration? How can I sort of really push my art in such a way that it feels special? And the thing is, you may not be able to control this, but you know it when it happens, because suddenly all this attention sort of comes on you and things go viral and things kind of take off, and you know that you're striking a chord that other people are just not. Like, there are artists that I know that they post something and it's just off to the races. Like if you look at my interview with Trevor Henderson, same thing. He was just sort of trying to do these. He had a very specialized niche that he cared about. He wanted to make sort of this real world creepypasta kind of horror thing. And he was taking photographs and painting monsters into the background. And he became really, really good at that thing. And, you'd say like maybe the best in the world at that thing, right? And then what happened is the world looked at that and said, he had a certain level of like where he struck a chord where it was like, people are like, that's the thing we've been looking for. You're really good at it. And everything sort of took off, right? So again, this is an area where you really don't have a ton of control over, but you can become very specialized, very intentional about the things that we try to do. In fact, this is a quick closing thought on this. When I was in college, a lot of artists really got this whole thing backwards. They were so focused on being at the end, at this excellence dip. They wanted to become unique. They wanted their style. They wanted their things. And they wanted to skip like all these basic things that had happened before. Learning how to paint, learning how to put tube on a palette, learning how to observe and copy those things. That's that can I do this dip, where they're just learning basic competencies so that they can become good enough. And they all wanted to skip this thing and go over to the excellence dip. But this is the foundation that you have to hang out in. One of the sort of famous examples of this is the artist Picasso. Picasso, as an artist, is extremely talented. If you look at his artwork when he was a kid and as a student, he learned the basics really, really well. He was extremely talented. And then he got to a point where he was like, I'm recognized for this. And then he created his abstract style as a means of creating himself. But he had still done all this work to be really good at those basics. And so what my final encouragement is like, identify where you're at in this process. Are you in this early step of like, I'm just trying to figure this thing out. I've never made a comic book before. I've never finished a graphic novel. Then I would say really slow down and focus on doing that thing. Finishing. You're going to learn so much by finishing. And then if you're in this professional dip, then it becomes about like submitting work, honing your skills, improving your quality, just like really digging in and going like, okay, I've accomplished basic competency. Now I've got to be good enough to withstand editorial scrutiny. And then once you're through that, it becomes, okay, now it's time for me to become me. It's time for me to develop my style and find my way in. It's not that you can't achieve any of these in different orders. It's just that usually I find that people who are like way over in this excellence thing, they're given this opportunity. I've known comic book artists who are really, really extremely talented, and they're given an opportunity. But then when they go to do that, because they so struggled with, they never developed these sort of like basic competencies, they really, really struggle. They really are unable to deliver. So recognize where you are, really focus on it, push through that thing, and go forward. So like if you're on that excellence tips, like everybody in the world's like, man, you're like the best. Then you might have to go back and go like, well, okay, I've achieved this thing, this excellence thing, but if I'm going to make a book, I've got to go all the way back to that can I do this phase. And you just take the time to learn how to do the thing. So those are my thoughts on this. I thought this book was really interesting. It's very short. I highly recommend checking it out because it really articulated what I was feeling, which was like, I've achieved these levels of success that I aimed for. I've made books. I've been published. Like, where do I go from here? What's next? And what I sort of realized was like, what's next for me is becoming like an industry best. And whether I can do that, I don't know. But it's the aim, just because it's the aim not for like my own posterity. It's because like that's where I have to aim for. That's where I've got to go. And if I hope to keep improving at this and achieving in this area, I've got to kind of achieve that sort of level of excellence. I've got to achieve a certain level of excellence at this. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to find the style that is uniquely me and become kind of extremely good at it. But I hope this was helpful. I hope you're doing all well out there. I look forward to being back again with the next video. I think the next video is going to be a review of the Tales from a Loop tabletop game. I really enjoyed that game, and I owe them a review. I need to do a review of it. So I got to sit down and talk about this because it's one of my favorites. But I hope you're doing well. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the journey I took, you can watch this video where I share with you all my journey from being an aspirer to a professional and getting my first book deal. I look forward to talking with you all more next time. Take care. Bye.